Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and in this video we're breaking down Alien Resurrection. Released in 1997, this sees the final appearance of Ellen Ripley. Well, kind of. As I'm sure you know, she died at the end of Alien 3, with this version being a clone. Coming just 5 years after that movie, I remember as a kid it feeling like it had a massive delay to it. Alien 3 had been a nightmare to get off the ground, and there were countless drafts and directions they wanted to go. If you've checked out our breakdown on that, then you know the full story, and it's linked on the channel now. If you don't know, it was basically going to center around Hicks, with Ripley appearing in a cameo role. Things were obviously changed, but her death in part 3 meant they had to go in a new direction for a sequel. Or so they thought. Hiring Joss Whedon to write the film's script, they'd initially been impressed with his work on Buffy, that had a young, strong female character, which is the direction they wanted to go for the series. Initially, they wanted to clone Newt and have her be the film's protagonist. Alien 3 released just before Jurassic Park, and you can really see how that movie changed the industry. Genetics, cloning, CGI, they'd all been things that were massive talking points of that film. Just in the same way dinosaurs chase people around the park, Fox wanted aliens to chase people around the ship. This was a big thing at the time, with Deep Blue Sea doing something similar just 2 years later. And Newt was originally in the Ripley role, and they were gonna have the climax on Earth. This final battle would see the station reaching the planet and the xenomorphs finally arriving. However, after writing a 30-page treatment, the studio had a change of heart. Instead of Newt, they now wanted Ripley, with Weaver initially being hesitant. Weaver had gone back and forth with a franchise, and every film had been difficult to get her to sign on to. Around this time, Fox had been also floating around the idea of Aliens vs Predator. The Dark Horse comic released in 1989, with a SNES game coming out in 1993. The script for that was also in the works, but Sigourney Weaver thought it was absolutely terrible. She'd actually really pressed for Ripley to die in Alien 3, and this was so she wouldn't somehow get pulled into doing it. Now, having to integrate her was apparently a nightmare for Whedon, who had no idea how he was going to bring her back. Ripley was completely wiped out in part 3 with her diving into a giant vat of molten lead. No way are you getting her or the Queen out of that, which Whedon apparently butted heads with the studio over. In the end, they said, look, there was a doctor who took blood samples, and they just kind of brushed over exactly what happened. Whedon then worked through 5 drafts, with them all ending against a battle with the newborn. According to IMDb trivia, the first draft ended in a snow forest, with the second in a futuristic junkyard. The third was in the hospital, and the fourth in the desert, but Fox just keep telling him the movie would be too expensive. This is because Earth would have 2/3 of it covered in a giant orbiting shell made of metal that Cole would have to steer the ship around. This would then crash land on the planet, which would lead to a ton of VFX work. Ripley would then lead the newborn away, and she'd fight it at one of the locations. Cole would then arrive in a gigantic harvester, with the newborn being torn up in its grinders. At the junkyard, they also had a version where the creature bit into Cole and sucked her metallic blood into its stomach. Using a magnetic crane, they managed to attach to the creature due to the metal now laced throughout its body. It would then be dropped into a trash compactor before escaping all mangled, leading to Ripley stabbing it through the head with a spear. The budget just got way too big though, and thus they had to keep scaling down the ending. Even with these issues though, Weaver apparently loved Whedon's script and thought it painted out Ripley in a much deeper light. She loved how she had ambiguous loyalties, and you didn't quite know what side she was on. Getting paid $11 million, that didn't hurt either, and in comparison, that's actually the full cost of the very first Alien movie. So yeah, Weaver said they drove a dump truck of money up to her house, and the movie went into production. Now, in case you don't know, there's actually 2 versions of the film. Yay! Not only did I just have to watch 3 versions of Godfather 3, but I also needed to watch 2 versions of Alien Resurrection. Kill me! Kill me! Has to be said though that director Jean-Pierre Jeunet has said the theatrical cut's his version. He sees the special edition more like an extended cut, even though Fox constantly say it's a director's one. It's the same thing that happened with basically all these movies on the anthology. Ridley Scott said the theatrical cut was his, Cameron said he liked the extended one, but he's also said he's fine with what he put out originally. Fincher wasn't even involved in the director's cut, and yeah, when it comes to the box set, it is more of a marketing gimmick. I find these director's cuts always have more to unpack though, and this extended one brings a different opening and ending. It contains an extra 7 minutes of footage, though most of the movie is still exactly the same. However, the theatrical cut begins with a slow montage of close-ups of Ripley's clones. This is supposed to be a younger version of her, with Weaver giving the team photos of herself as a child to work with. Studying the growth of caterpillars into butterflies, they wanted the pods throughout the film to feel like they were cocoons. They also looked at the cryopods throughout the franchise and wanted to keep things in line line with what had come before. Now the longer cut begins with a mouth that's clearly meant to resemble the xenomorphs. We then pull out to see that it's a bug, which is then squashed by a worker at the station. The CGI looks absolutely terrible, and my guess is that they cut it down to how bad it looked. Like, even in 1997, mate, Lara Croft's triangle tits were embarrassed by this. Gene decided to scrap it just 3 days before the film was finalised, and in the end they didn't touch it up for this release. He said he hates that this has seen the light of day, and that it was never intended to be in the film. Originally, the ship had a different design as well, with its verticality not fitting the frame. This was supposed to resemble a medical scalpel, but they changed it to be more horizontal for the extended cut. Now this bug crushing shows the power dynamic that's flipped for the film. Early on it's the humans in control, and we're the ones who are running the show. This is exemplified in Brad Dourif sticking out his jaw and taunting one of the creatures through the glass. He's obsessed with their mouth, and Dourif perfectly manages to act out the grotesque thing that xenomorphs are known for. According to the Now Playing podcast, the guy in the suit during the scene was actually more scared of him. This was also shot to be a flip on the iconic moment from Alien 3 that's probably one of the most famous moments in that movie. There it was the xenomorph that was the predator, with humanity being afraid. Here it's the humans who are the threats, with the xenomorphs feeling fear. The extended cut also has deeper ties to the franchise, with Dr. Gettyman asking Ripley about Fury 161. This was the planet from Alien 3, with it showing Ripley retained some of her memories. It's also revealed that this is where they got the blood samples from, with it being suspected Clemens got these when carrying out his tests. Further cemented in a nod to Newt, she gets shown a girl with blonde hair. Ripley smiles and then starts getting torn up, with her likely remembering her fate. It's possible that this is also a nod to her daughter Amanda, who was a lot of the driving force for how Ripley was with Newt. Amanda had brown hair and was explored in Alien Isolation, but yeah, these character details helped to flesh her out. We also discover that Weyland-Yutani was eventually bought out by Walmart.
Bought out by Walmart.
That's that classic Joss Whedon humour. Ripley's tell the company has changed, but she says it won't make a difference. This echoes Newt's sentiments in Aliens when Ripley says the Marines will protect her.
Well, it won't make any difference. You're still gonna die.
It won't make any difference.
On top of that, we also get that alternate ending. The original has the crew arriving in Earth's atmosphere and looking down at the land. Cole asks Ripley what she wants to do, and she says she doesn't know as she's a stranger there herself. The alternate cut has them making it to the planet where we see the world's in ruins. This included a shot of the Eiffel Tower, which is now toppled over. The director is of course French, so we had this as a little nod to his home country. We then get that line about being a stranger, but also have a bit more of a tease about Ripley's fate. Cole says the army will be there soon, and they'll likely have questions. However, she suggests that someone could get lost there, and that they have a chance to fade into the landscape. So that's kind of all the changes, and after our opening shot, we pull out to see the Auriga. Named after the constellation, this has roots in mythology. There, Auriga is said to show what happened to the son of Helios. Named Pathon, according to the legends, he tricked his dad into letting him ride his chariot. He then crashed, which burned and scorched the earth. This of course foreshadows the fate of the vessel as it goes to return home. In the end, it burns through the atmosphere and explodes on the planet, which kinda highlights how it ties in with the myth. Either way, from here we cut to Ripley in her chamber, and here...
My mommy always said there were no monsters. No real ones. But there are.
Which is a direct callback to this line from Aliens.
There are no monsters, no real ones, but there are.
Now, immediately you'd think she's talking about the xenomorphs, but she's of course referring to the humans. I think throughout this we see she gains an understanding with them and somewhat has a bond. James Bond. Now, thematically, we have a lot of things going on. For Alien 3, we talked about all the Christ-like and religious imagery that they laced throughout the movie. Ripley went into the vat in a Christ-like pose, and now they have her being resurrected. On top of that, Now Playing also pointed out thematically that they've done things throughout the franchise to show the similarities between her and the xenomorphs. In the first film, both were survivors. The second one had Ripley discovering a mother much in the same way she was. The third, she ended up becoming a mother, and she's now a genetic mix between the two. They said the franchise has always been based around parasites and the fear of something growing inside you. This movie takes things to that next step and now says that you're a mix of that thing. Being operated on, they managed to remove the alien queen, which is when Ripley wakes up. This scene was added for the extended cut, and it shows how dangerous she is. We then get a scene of her waking in a sack, with awakenings and birth being laced throughout the franchise. The pods in the first film are almost egg-like themselves, with this being the womb in their ship overseen by Mother. Here though, the sack is more web-like, indicating that Ripley's something else. The alien queen especially had a spider-like design, with this being brought across here. In the script, the newborn was also initially envisioned as being like a spider. There it's described as an eyeless creature with 6 legs at the back and 2 arms at the front. It was also going to possess mandibles and immobilize its prey similar to a spider. The mandibles would wrap around someone's head and the inner mouth would come out and then drain its victims. In the book, Jonah has a phobia of spiders and he's terrified of the xenomorphs. This is why he ends up shooting that one later on when he climbs up the ladder, but it doesn't really make that much sense in the movie. Either way, she notices a tattoo that says A, revealing there were other clones. We will talk about this later on, but it foreshadows a big scene we get later on in the movie. From the off though, Ripley's violent and vicious, with her struggling to recapture her humanity. However, it does get a bit Whedon-y, with her saying
Fuck.
instead of fork. It's that Joss Whedon writing. After getting a tour of the ship, we then see the Queen in most of her glory. Now I say that because Fox wisely destroyed most of the stuff from the Aliens movie, but they managed to find this alien queen in the scrap. So they reused that, and I have to say, as divisive as this movie is, the creature design's really solid. Not you, newborn. The xenomorphs look great though, and it's a big step up from the puppets and stuff they had just 5 years earlier. The book and script also had additional lines that explain why the queen's reproductive cycle changed.
At first, everything was normal. The queen laid her eggs, but then she started to change. She added a second cycle, so...
Now, originally, Dr. Wren tampered with her genetic code to stop her laying hundreds of eggs. The ship wouldn't have capacity for this, and it would make the situation infinitely more dangerous. They try to change this, but the book says, the beast doesn't trade. It then just added a different cycle that allowed it to create the newborn. It took the birthing cycles of a human from Ripley, much in the same way the xenomorphs adapt certain traits of their hosts. So that explains it, and from here we cut to Ripley eating food and warning of the cycle that's about to begin. We get a wide shot and see televisions and lights built into the wall and hanging from the ceiling. Now, this entire set was created in a way so that the lights for the scenes were built into the environment. This is so they didn't have to have studio lights hanging down and can do wider shots to show off the location. It makes the ship feel more authentic and adds a layer to the realism. Now from here we cut to the Betty and get a shot from inside the cockpit. The way it approaches, I feel, is something they later referenced in the opening scene of Dead Space. Now the Betty was sort of designed with the same mind as being akin to the Millennium Falcon. Described as a kit bash, this would be like you took several modelling kits and then put them all together. According to IMDb Trivia, the hull would be a Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II. This had then been modified with other chambers, and the cockpit then being altered. Overall, they wanted it to look like a jackhammer, which would play up its blue-collar nature. Overall, I feel like the paint job on it is also akin to the colour of the facehuggers, which we can see in the models of the ship. Now Fox, yeah, they knew the Alien movies had killed it abroad, and they went with a lot of European people for the cast and crew. Junet went with a lot of people he'd worked with before, including Dominique Pignon from the movie Delicatessen. Dominique Pignon, I should have said. Junet directed it along with longtime collaborator Mark Caro, who he'd worked with on several other films. However, this project had them deciding not to work together, with Caro not really wanting to work in Hollywood. Junet saw it like directing a commercial, and he said he gave the studio the movie they wanted. Whedon has come out though and said they didn't do what he wanted, and yeah, there's lots of drama that we'll talk about later on. I think it's fine, mate, and honestly, I think there's a strong set of side characters. The Alien franchise has always had a good set of them though, with the first 2 movies especially being really solid. Part 3 is just like, well, I don't know, it's all bald dudes who act pretty similar, so this cast is 3rd place by default. However, I think that's a bit unfair, as it would be a very strong cast if the rest of the franchise wasn't as top tier as it is. Whedon of course also made Firefly, which went on to Serenity, and you can definitely see his archetypes here. Now Winona Ryder was massive at the time, and I think people forget just how hot she was. She's so hot right then. Now she obviously had a big shoplifting scandal that led to her arrest in 2001. She also took a hiatus for a couple of years, and it's only really the last 7 or 8 years that she's came back into the limelight. Ryder was seen as someone with a timeless feel to her who could do both period pieces and futuristic sci-fi. Though it's never been confirmed though, I do feel like she was going to be someone who would carry the rest of the franchise. We will talk later on about what happened to her and Ripley after the film, which is told to us in the book Original Sin. Either way, we get a tour of the ship and at one point see a video game titled Adam Zone. This was developed by Argonaut Games, who also worked on the tie-in game for the movie. This box was created in just a couple of days, with them throwing it together with pieces from the ship. You also see a lot of foreshadowing with Christie's wrist guns, which were designed to be reminiscent of Travis Bickle's ones in Taxi Driver. From here we go on to see Jonna showing that Vrees can't feel a thing in his legs by dropping a knife into them. Cole snapping this creates some tension with him, and yeah, I like this setting up the characters. Originally, we were also going to have an assassin named Sanju, with Jet Li being in talks to play the character. He'd be a martial artist who was quick with a blade. However, they ended up excising the character after realizing they probably had too many. I did wonder if pieces of this were then adapted into Predators, as we have a sort of similar character there. Going on board, we see they're smuggling weapons in, with Jonna's canteen turning into one later.
Jesus Christ, Jotter, what do you put in this shit? Battery acid?
Just for color.
It shows how ragtag they are, but also highlights why they're so helpless against the xenomorphs. They don't have all the weapons they'd want, and it's also explained to us that they don't allow weapons in case a bullet puts a hole in the hull. As they say, this will suck them into space, which sets up the death of the newborn later on. Originally they wanted to kill Lambert this way in Alien, but an effect like that in the 70s would have eaten up the budget. A death for this was then scripted for Alien 3, but with it all being set on a planet, it didn't make sense. Now they were planning to have an unnamed soldier die through this in the film, and the effects team worked on it for several weeks. However, upon showing the test footage, Jean-Pierre thought it was way too cool of a death for such a small character. So they retooled things and gave it to the newborn, with it building off the back of the big bad getting sucked into space that we've seen in Alien and Aliens. Anyway, Frank meets with the general, and we hear that they're basically trafficking humans. We see money being handed over, and this contains the face of producer Bill Badolato. Also, later on, we see this guy has the hairiest shoulders I've ever seen. Like, I'm not even mad. That's impressive, mate. I also love how they have a little block of whiskey, which we can see by the label. This is then lasered into liquid form, and just these little touches, they add so much to the world. Now we also hear how Cole is a bit suspicious of what's going on with their cargo, as it's all being kept cloak and dagger. Throughout the film we get shots of the ship in space near a planet, and know from the promotional material that this is Pluto. Not a planet, but you know what I mean. This again adds to the secrecy of the project, as Pluto is of course the furthest planet. Well, it's not a planet anymore, it's a thing in space. I don't even know anymore, I was lied to at school. Leave your comments below. Have they made planets woke now by removing Pluto? Now, we know from the backstory with Cole exactly what happened with her. During the decline of the android industry, we had second generation ones that created a singularity. These androids built and made other androids, with these being called Autons that then started rebelling against humans.
You're an Auton.
Most of them were massacred, but Cole managed to get out and hide. Since then, she's been on a quest to save humanity. Cole then learned about the xenomorphs from the book Space Beast, which was created by Morse from Alien 3. She discovered the Auriga had plans to create more xenomorphs and then infiltrated the crew of the Betty. Anyway, Frank asks for a couple of nights aboard the ship, and they're given strict instructions to not cause trouble. We then see as the human cargo is brought in and get the horrifying scene with people suspended above their eggs. As much as I think this movie gets dogged on, I do think it's got really memorable moments like this. Even the scientists struggle with what's happening, as they know it's a horrible fate. Except for this guy who's kind of smirking away. Now these guys in the chambers, yeah, they're going to need some new clothes, and they might want to check out our merch store right below the video. We've actually just launched a new alien-inspired chestburster t-shirt that I'm sure these people would look back on and laugh at. They love it, you'll love it as well, mate, and it all goes towards helping videos like this get made. If you're in the mood for some classic films as well, then you should also check out our Partners at Arrow video. They've got tons of 4K films on there like Silence of the Lambs, The Chronicles of Riddick, RoboCop, and more. Get 10% off using the code HEAVYSpoilers and clicking my link below. 10% off with the code HEAVYSpoilers and clicking my link below. Now from here we get to probably the most legendary bit of trivia from this entire film. We see Ripley taunting Jonna with a basketball, and her completely embarrassing the character in the team. As she walks off, she then throws a basketball over her head, which leads to it going directly in the net. Although it seems like this could be a special effect, it's something that happened for real.
I wasn't even thinking get it in because I was so sort of demoralized this one. And, you know, nothing but net. Just swish.
Because it looks like, you know, it could have been a trick, and it wasn't. I was there. She did it.
It was like a wild thing. I don't think my feet touched the ground for about, 10 days.
Perlman has since said in interviews his biggest worry is that he messed up the take, as his reaction was genuine shock at it going in. Such a great moment, and it actually kinda sucks that the aspect ratio makes it look like an effect when Sigourney Weaver was getting nothing but net. Jeunet said he was frustrated and thought audiences might have thought they quote-unquote scissored the takes together, but the story has obviously become pretty widespread. According to IMDb Trivia, Weaver's described it as being one of the best moments of her life after her wedding day and the birth of her daughter. Either way, you know now, and Ripley also gets a nosebleed after being smashed in the face like the like button. This is something that the characters had in all 4 Alien films, but when blood gets thrown on the floor, we see there's something different to it. It's corrosive, which sets up something down the line, and Cole also recognizes the name Ripley. Now that night they bunker down, and we see the xenomorphs learning danger and cause and effect. They use human deduction and problem solving later on, which shows that they're evolving. Again, this is something that kind of became a trend at the time, with monster movies having to step it up in order to not become stale. Again, it's something we saw in Deep Blue Sea, and it takes the creatures to being more than just monsters. Anyway, after feigning being drunk, Cole infiltrates Ripley's cell to kill her. However, after realizing the Queen's been removed, she sees there's no point. There's a bit of a tete-a-tete, and Cole's sent outside after Ripley tells her they're aware that she's there. Captured and taken to the crew, the group's then labelled terrorists and told they could be executed along with Cole. So they break out the big guns, which leads to a scene to show how resourceful they are. They ricochet bullets, and this was originally an unused idea from Jean-Pierre's film The City of Lost Children. This helps them to capture the bad guy scientist, and we also get to meet Vincent. Wait, is that Tuco from Breaking Bad? Anyway, just in the same way that they make a daring escape, the xenomorphs do the same thing through killing one of their own. All hell breaks loose, and the gang have to make their way back to the Betsy. Now, though it's not in the movie, the script explained that parts of the ship were punctured and locked down. This is why they end up having to take the route they do, rather than just going back through the straightforward way they came. When filming, they only actually had 2 characters built, which they reused over and over. One subtle thing they do though is that they darken them throughout the film, which makes them feel even more ominous. We then get a great escape pod scene involving a grenade and see Vrees building a shotgun out of pieces of his chair. All the weapons in the movie were custom built for the film, whereas in the past they'd modified existing ones. He also ends up getting acid on him, which again is one of the more memorable parts of this movie. When rewatching it, I did feel like the pieces were there, they just didn't quite stick them together properly. Now we also have Ripley having to escape her cell, and the novelization explains the thinking behind this. As mentioned earlier, she has some vague memories from the past, and when trying to escape her cell, she contemplates breaking the glass in the ceiling. This is something she tried to do during Aliens when she and Newt were locked in with the facehugger. However, this didn't work, and it was Hudson saying cut the power that made her then realize she should do this to escape. Finally, the General gets attacked from behind, which leads to him pulling out a bit of his brain. The execs at Fox apparently hated this and thought it was too comedic, but in the end, Jean-Pierre convinced them to keep it in. Test audiences, mate, they bloody loved it too. Frank's then killed, and this scene apparently caused some kickoffs during editing. Whedon wanted it removed because he had no idea why Frank decided to go into the corridor. Apparently, Jeunet turned around and said, "Because it's in the script!" And things were meant to be pretty frosty after that. Anyway, Ripley makes an entrance by sticking a gun through his wound and killing a xenomorph. Felt like it might be a flip on the chest burster, but now it's Ripley arriving to kill a xenomorph. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, but then she does rip out a tongue and hands it to Cole, which many have thought resembles a, let's say, a woman's toy. Trying to keep monetized here. This is primarily brought up in videos touching upon the sexual tension between Cole and Ripley, with this moment being the thing that most hang that analysis on. Not gonna poo-poo other people's theories, because we thought Mephisto was gonna be in WandaVision, but yeah, there might be something there if you want to dive into it. Cole then says they can't trust her, to which Christy replies, "I don't trust anyone." This was an intentional nod to Alien, in which Dallas and Ripley argue about bringing Kane back on board the ship. Ripley says to Dallas she doesn't trust Ash, to which Dallas replies he doesn't trust anyone. Either way, they come across Vrees, who says,
"Who are you expecting, Santa Claus?"
This is a nod to the Lost City of Children, which also contained this line. Coming across the clone room, we see them in tanks, similar to how the facehuggers were portrayed in Aliens. This time though, it's Ripley who's the clone, with these being ghastly abominations. Again, it's a really memorable scene, with the 7th iteration being left alive. She says, "Kill me," which is a line that appeared in the franchise before. In the deleted scene from Alien, we saw Ripley coming across Dallas, who asks her to do it. There's also the soldier strung up on the wall in Aliens, with it being a harrowing way to to live. Wish someone killed me before this breakdown. Now, this is sort of a repurposed scene from an unproduced script of Alien 3. There were 2 iterations with failed xenomorph clones kept in tanks, which the main character ended up burning. However, we get the emotional aspect added here, with it being Ripley destroying herself, and this is the scene that Weaver said made her sign on. Anyway, we learn that they've got 3 hours until the ship returns to Earth and they start their mad dash across the station. This includes running into Larry Purvis, played by Leland Orser. He's basically the guy in a zombie movie who's been bit and he's got a chest burster living inside of him. It adds more insult to injury though, because we know that the people he's with are the people that dropped him off here. They don't really touch upon that much, but in the end they decide to take him so they can freeze him on the ship and remove it through the medical equipment there. It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him. This line wasn't actually in the theatrical cut, so it just seems like they decided to take him along for no reason. Now next we go to the longest scene on the disc, with the group having to swim through the ship. Filmed on the Fox lot, an especially constructed soundstage, this took almost a week just to fill with water. However, the liquid was seen as being too clear and thus they added milk to murky it. The cast then trained for 4 weeks, with it taking an additional 3 to shoot the scene. If you've watched our Abyss breakdown, then you'll know underwater scenes can be a nightmare, and this wasn't any different. Perlman apparently knocked himself out when filming, as apparently he swam to the surface, knocked himself out in a sprinkler, and then had to be rescued. Ryder almost drowned at the age of 12, and since then she hadn't been in the water. She would rather they used a body double, but they said it would be too obvious. So she filmed the scene in the end, but suffered from an anxiety attack on the first day. Each actor was assigned a diver as well, with them all having backup oxygen tanks. However, Leyland also left to go to the toilet and also ended up running out of breath. He was saved by another diver, but it was apparently a very close call. There was also people weighing in it all the time. It was completely closed overhead, and yeah, just a nightmare to film. Apparently they couldn't see their hand in front of their face, and they were just swimming around for ages, hoping that a diver would come down and rescue them. So yeah, not nice, but in the end though, I think it comes out alright, with it being another one of those memorable scenes in the movie. There's clear allusions to Jaws as well, even in the music stings and the xenomorphs grabbing people's legs. Just when they're escaping, they also realise there's eggs surrounding the surface, and we then get a great facehugger attack. Guessing this had an oxygen tank on it, but I can't find anywhere that specifies that. So it's a theory. The xenomorphs are still swimming towards them though, and you've got this really high pressure scene with threats on all sides. Christie then has to bounce grenades, and the chase then continues up a ladder. We have Reese hanging on Christie's back, the scientist seemingly killing Carl, and then Jonna hanging upside down and shooting at the xenomorph. I think I might actually like this movie, you know, but when all seems lost, Call of course arrives to save the day, revealing she's an android. So you have the 2 main characters that seem human on the surface, but secretly they're hiding something. Going to the chapel, Call ends up tapping into the mainframe, with there being clear religious imagery. The computer itself is also called Father, which is of course a name often used for God. Beyond that though, the computer in Alien was called Mother, so it's a flip on that.
Father!
Father's dead, asshole.
If we're continuing with the religious metaphors now, we could also be talking about how humans have destroyed God. This is because they're able to make clones like Ripley and also synthetic people like Call. The title is of course Resurrection, and we have these 2 characters returning from the dead.
Kill you! Does that compute?
Now, does that compute is also a nod of the first Alien, as Mother would often reply by saying does not compute. Call is then told to crash the ship into Earth because they burned too much fuel to change direction or divert. Being an android that's interested in saving humanity, they have her saying she'll select a body of water rather than land. But that might not happen. We also learn that she's accessed the government's dirty little secrets, and we'll talk about what this would have set up down the line. Ripley is then pulled through the floor in classic Alien fashion, and we see she's absorbed into the nest. Making it back to the ship, the group are then confronted by the scientist, which is when Larry's shot and he goes into labour. It's weird describing it like that, but we get an excellent shot where we travel down his throat and see the chest burster inside his ribcage. The majority of this was done for real as well, with them placing a camera down Ursa's throat. They then pull this out and reverse the footage in order to create the effect. Anyway, the newborn is birthed, and this gigantic animatronic continues the legacy of practical creatures that the series is known for. Having to be operated by a crane and 9 puppeteers, it completely dwarfed everything on the set. Now originally they wanted to give it Sigourney Weaver's face, but they thought it might be a bit too similar to Cell from Species. They also gave it both male and female genitals, which it had as part of the puppet. However, in post-production, Junet admitted it might be a bit too much even for a Frenchman, and after some pushback from the studio, they were all digitally removed. You might notice as well that when the creature first comes over to Ripley, that she doesn't really make eye contact with it. This is something she learned when making Gorillas in the Mist, and used the rules from that of not making eye contact with dangerous predators. Anyway, after it kills the Queen, Ripley makes a mad dash to the ship, and doing a big leap, she gets back on board the Betty. However, they have a stowaway in the back with the newborn having snuck aboard the ship. It chases Cole throughout and kills my guy Tuco, which leads to Ripley going there to take it down. Got this weird thing where it kind of comforts and looks after Cole, and it has big black eyes that make it seem cute, I'm gonna admit. I think the caring instincts is something that seems to have gone into influence Barbarian, which is also probably one of my favourite horrors. I'm not saying that this is though. Either way, Ripley uses her acidic blood to disintegrate the ship's glass, which leads to the newborn being sucked out into space. Not sure if we can show it, but the body was made out of plaster, with it being assembled through various pieces. Wire was then attached to each one of these, which was then pulled out one by one to give the impression it was being ripped apart. The Riga then impacts the Earth, and hey, doesn't look like a body of water that love. Killed like 500 million people there, Cole. Bad call. Anyway, the group land on the planet with Ripley and Cole teasing a future sequel that we now know we're never gonna get. Weaver was signed on to return as writer, and they actually had some interest from notable names. Both Ridley Scott and James Cameron were attached at various points, but the studio ended up going in a different direction. They instead put focus on Alien vs Predator, and Alien 5 ended up being mothballed. Now as for what happened after this, we have the book Original Sin. This continues the story of the crew of the Betty, with Ripley once more running into the Xenomorphs. Alongside Cole, Ripley was gonna access a data core on a station, and the pair would blast their way out after being spotted by guards. While this was going on, they were noticed by a reporter named Sigourney, who recognized Ripley. Stowing away on their ship, she wanted to get the story of the Millennium and uncover the truth behind the government's cover-ups. Now across the galaxy, a facehugger egg was discovered on a botanical colony called Domes Epsilon. We discover that after the events of this movie, that a shadowy government group known as Loki had very nefarious plans. They'd been communicating with an alien species known as the Malakak, who were the space engineers before they were called the Space Engineers. This of course released before Prometheus, so we didn't know who that corpse at the start of Alien belonged to. The film was gonna explore it though and give us that entire backstory. They had a deal where they gave humans technology in exchange for the xenomorphs that humanity made. The Betty were disrupting these operations, and yeah, it gets a bit fan-fiction-y. Reaching the domes, they discover that the aliens are running wild, and you can pretty much figure out how it goes from there. Assembling a team of survivors, they do the usual where another character is revealed to be a synthetic who's secretly working for Loki. In the end, they escape the station and then detonate it from space. It's sort of how most of these movies tend to end, but we'd actually get more of a dangling carrot for next time. The Malakak would be furious their operations had been disrupted, and they'd be out for revenge in Alien 6. Honestly, probably a good idea we didn't get that movie, and this film obviously wasn't well received at the time. Going back through it, I know I've ripped it a bit, but you know what? I think it's alright. Definitely enjoyed it more than Alien 3 this watch through. Don't kill me. Please just go back and watch it, and then if you still hate it, I'll completely understand. But alas, Whedon himself has been very harsh in it, with him deeming the movie as unwatchable. In 2005 he said, "It wasn't a question of doing everything differently, although they changed the ending. It was mostly a matter of doing everything wrong. They said the lines, but they said them all wrong, and they cast it wrong, and they designed it wrong, and they scored it wrong. They did everything wrong they could possibly do." That's actually a fascinating lesson in filmmaking, because everything they did reflects back to the script or looks like something from it, and people assume that if I hated it, then they changed the script. But it wasn't so much they changed it, they executed it in such a ghastly fashion, they rendered it unwatchable. Junet has said he's proud of the film though, but that he just didn't like the studio system and has since disowned ever working in Hollywood again. He also fired back at Whedon in 2022 and said, "He's very good at making films for American geeks, something for morons, because he's very good at making Marvel films. I hate this kind of movie. It's so silly, so stupid. But didn't you make Alien Resurrection, mate? Whedon has since been pretty much blacklisted in Hollywood though, with several people coming forth about his unprofessional behaviour both on and off set. The movie was also the first Alien film to not be nominated for an Oscar, and its legacy is still thought of as being the movie that kinda ruined the franchise. But yeah, I thought it was okay, and definitely not as bad as I remember. I hope this breakdown has helped you gain more of an appreciation for it though, and obviously let me know all your thoughts below. If you've enjoyed it as well, please drop a like, and if you want to support the channel as a member of the Spoiler Society, then please click the join button. You'll get early access to videos like this, and it goes a massive way towards helping us out. Now if you want something else to watch, we've got a breakdown on screen of one of our other classic movie breakdowns. I think it's The Matrix. That was the last one I did, which was about 2 months ago, but it's on screen right now, so head over there after this. With out of the way, I've been your host Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.